Welcome to the next episode of the Security Champions podcast. I'm your host, Micheal Burch, and in this episode, we're going to be doing things a little different. I've decided to do a holiday special and highlight reel some of my favorite clips from throughout the year. Now, I always start my episodes out by introducing my guests and have them tell about their security journey and how they got where they are. So seeing as I'm the host today and the guest, I think it'd be fun to tell you a little bit about my security background. So let's actually go way back when I first got introduced to technology. So my parents were actually network engineers, sales network engineers for a little company called Extreme Networks back in the day. So I got a lot of exposure to that world. I actually got the opportunity to go with my parents to go do a bunch of trade shows and a lot of other places. Funny part was, I remember there's an old name they used to give to the equipment at Extreme Networks. They call them the Barney boxes because they were purple and green and they definitely looked extreme. I got a great story actually when I was younger and I was at one of these trade shows. My dad thought it was funny if I basically got a name tag for the company and I went around and acted like I was a young savant working for Extreme Networks and got to go get all the sales pitches and go get involved and actually ask people about their products and everything else. It was a very unique and great experience to see that side of the world early on. Now, as I kind of moved on in my life, I didn't stick with technology right off the gate. I actually decided that I want to join the military while I was in high school. I ended up signing my contract my junior year. I actually signed on 9/11/2006 was the day I actually signed my military contract. So going to my senior year, I already knew what I wanted to do and where I was going. I was going to the military. I actually signed a contract as an Army Ranger, and I got airborne school put in there. Funny is when I went to the recruiters, I didn't know a lot about what I was doing. I knew that I wanted to go out. I knew I wanted a kind of an action role. They basically pitched me saying, hey, do you want to jump out of airplanes? I was like, absolutely. That sounds amazing. Where do I sign the dotted line? And they asked me if you want to be a ranger. And I was like, I've heard of it. I don't really know a lot about it. And they pointed at a poster on the wall. And there was this guy. He was in a boonie cap. He was waist deep in water, walking through the woods in camo gear. And I was like, that looks awesome. Sign me up. Definitely not in the fine print of what you'd actually be doing when you got to that organization. But right out of high school, I shipped to basic training. It was within about a month of leaving high school. Went in and I went straight into basic training, went in as an infantryman, so did an infantryman AIT. Right after that, went straight to airborne school, got to jump out of some airplanes. And then I went into, at the time it was called the Ranger Indoctrination Program. It was called RIP. They call it RASP now. But it's basically a selection process that you get to go through to try to be an Army Airborne Ranger, part of the actual Ranger Regiment. Definitely for my first type of selection vet and hardest thing I had to do right out of high school was the Ranger Indoctrination Program. They had a huge attrition rate, but it was about a month long, got through that, and I passed and was able to move on to 1st Ranger Battalion, where I got to basically live out of Savannah, Georgia, for a few years while I was there at Ranger Battalion. Great experience. Love the city. Visit there as often as I can. Now, when I was with the Rangers, I did a couple deployments right about 9 months from the time I graduated high school till I was in downtown Mosul, Iraq, doing night raids with Rangers. Did a stint there, came back, went straight to Army Ranger School, passed Army Ranger School, was home for about a month after that, and I was back out the door to Afghanistan for the first time, Logar province area. Did a trip there. Coming back from that second deployment, I thought it was time to make a shift. I want to advance my career. So I ended up going to Special Forces Selection. Passed Special Forces Selection, and the fun part about Special Forces Selection, you can come in and say, hey, I want to do this. So at first I was like, I just want to, run and gun. But they're like, no, we want to make you a medic. So based on your scores and how you test and everything else during the selection process, they see what job best fits your skills. So I ended up becoming a medic. So I spent the next 2 years basically in training, learning special operation techniques as well as medical practices, doing rotations at hospitals, EMS, that type of stuff, until I finally earned my Green Beret in 2013. Ended up getting stationed over at 3rd Special Forces Group. And I spent the rest of my career there at 3rd Special Forces Group. About 5 years active duty time. Did 2 more trips to Afghanistan. My last trip I actually did was to northern Nigeria in Africa, dealing with some stuff with the Boko Haram group out there. And then that kind of ended my military career active duty in 2018. Now, one of the key highlight things that really brought me back into tech and made me realize I wanted to do cybersecurity when I got out is about a year and a half before I got out, almost 2 years. We were taking training, basically preparing us for our trip to Nigeria. And we had some opportunities to take some specialized training. One of the ones I got to participate in was a technical course. This technical course basically took us took us through a lot of different technology techniques to be able to conceal money, move money, conceal communications, and that type of stuff while you were in a hostile environment. So things that they taught us were things like steganography. They went in and were talking about how to use cryptocurrency. And that was basically my first exposure to a lot of that type of stuff. I sat down, I remember it was like the first week of that class. I sat down, and they're like, all right, we're going to install Linux on your current machine. And I was like, well, I've heard of Linux before, but never really played with it. By the end of that course, I think like a lot of technicians that come in and start playing with a lot of the like, hey, I have access to the command line in a way I never thought I could before, or those type of environments. I literally went home, I wiped all my machines, put Linux Mint on all of them, and I never looked back, right? Like I fell in love with the granularity that I could get with in doing technology, diving to stuff like cryptocurrency, doing these type of techniques. So in 2017, when I was kind of thinking about what I was going to do, I was at my midpoint decision point, right? I was 11 years active duty service coming up, and I either had to re-enlist, which basically if I was going to re-enlist, I was going to do for 6 years, I was going to do my whole 20 active, or should I go do something else, right? Should I go try my hand at something in the civilian sector? And so I decided it was time, especially because I had a family at the time, kids, it was time for me to take a step back and spend more time there. While I was actually in Africa, I started doing night schooling and pursuing my bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. I was able to complete my bachelor's degree in cybersecurity by the time I got out of the Army in 2018. And then on part of my transition, I went out and I went and got my certification in Net Plus and my certification in Security Plus. So for everybody else out there who's done your own type of cyber kind of progressions, you get these moments in your life where you're like, oh man, I think I know everything about what I need to know. And then you realize you don't know everything you need to know. That experience hit me when I first got out of the Army and I was trying to find a civilian job. I remember I had an interview. It was actually with Booz and Allen. I show up to my interview. I'm dressed well. I'm super confident. I got my bachelor's in cyber. I got Security Plus. I've been been reading books and listening to podcasts. I'm ready to go. I get into that interview. I sit down and I get destroyed. They immediately go technical. They start asking me a bunch of hands-on stuff and tooling and everything else. And I immediately realized that my understanding of cybersecurity at that moment in my life was so thin, it wasn't even funny. Like I knew concepts, I knew understanding of things, but I didn't have any tangible hands-on experience that I was able to translate. So I didn't get the job, which was kind of a humbling moment for me because I thought, yeah, the Army, I'm like, I'm a Green Beret. Anybody's going to hire me for anything, right? Well, that's not how the real world works. And I got to learn that real quick. And it was good. It was really good because it forced me to work from the ground up. And I think that's such an important thing for people coming into this industry. So what I did to further my cybersecurity career is actually coming out of active duty. I didn't leave the military completely. I went into the North Carolina National Guard, and they have an MOS or a job title that is called the 25 Delta, and that's a cyber network defender. What really enticed me about doing that job is they actually take you, and their training courses for that job is that they send you to a bunch of SANS boot camps, one after another, and you get to go get certified in SANS in a much more industry recognized way, right? So it's not just an Army created course, but it's a course that's created out of SANS boot camps. So as I was basically pursuing that cybersecurity career in the National Guard, I was able to go out and step out. And I went to basically right off the bat, within the first year of me leaving the Army, I went down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and I ended up taking 5 SANS certifications in a span of, I want to say it was 4 months. 4 months. It was an amazing experience. It's funny I say that because I'll probably get a knock on the door from a few people in work, because in some areas where I currently work, SANS is a competitor. But their certification for cybersecurity education type programs is amazing. It got me so much of that hands-on experience that I was missing from my college education, right? Because there's a much more technical deep dive in those type of certifications. Now, at the same time, I was still fighting to figure out what my civilian career was going to look like. So my first job was actually ended up being with Khaki. It's a contracting company that hired me. And instead of me jumping out the gate and be like, hey, everyone's going to hire me for cyber, I actually got picked up as a desktop admin. So it was a great job. I got in. It was a contracted seat, so there was a lot of free time during the day while I was waiting on tickets, which I was able to use to study and continue further growth in my education for the job I want to have, as well as the fact that I was able to learn technology from a base level. So I did a short stint with Khaki working as a desktop technician. And however, though, I had a friend that was working at Lockheed Martin, kind of in the same area that I was working. And just kind of give you a little, hey, I was working in kind of a skiff area. So it was somewhere like where you literally have to go in and like scan badges, fingerprints, and have to have a top secret clearance to like work on that area. So I was able to find a buddy of mine I had met in working at Lockheed Martin in the same area I was working. They're like, hey, we have a position opening up for a designer. And at the time, I had kind of decided that actually on the civilian career side, I wanted to start leaning into development. And the reason for that is when I went to college, I started cybersecurity as my main course, but I started taking electives that were software development. And after I took my first JavaScript, HTML class, I fell in love with software development. And then every class, every single elective I took after that was C++. I was like, I just want to learn development for all my electives. So all my main courses were security. All my electives were software development. So I was really looking to actually try to get into that developer space because I just fell in love with coding, right? I fell in love with developing software. But they wouldn't hire me as a developer because I have any real experience as a developer, but they needed a designer. So I spent a few weeks studying as hard as I could to learn UX, design. I even had color boards set up in my house, trying to figure out all the ways I could possibly pass, or color wheels, mood boards, the whole thing, right? Went in, rocked the interview, and got hired as a front-end designer. But that's not really where I wanted to end. I wanted to be a developer, but this was the first chance I could work with a development team. So what I did is while I was sitting with that designing team, I would get front-end work from the development team and the designing and basically, hey, we need to do a mock-up. I was using Azure at the time, and doing wireframes basically. But I was looking at the code base that the developers were working on. I was like, why don't I just code the front end for you, right? At the time, they were just using JavaScript and jQuery. It was not a very, they hadn't moved over to a modern framework really yet. It's a government system, a little bit behind, I think, everybody else in the industry. So I just started coding out the front end instead of mocking it up with wireframes and then handing it over to the development team. Well, I did that for a few months, and then finally they're like, we're just going to make you a developer, because obviously that's where your strengths are lying, and you're creating really great high-end front-end work that the developers are able to work with. Jumped on development team. The senior developer is like, hey, look, I don't need a front-end developer. I need a full-stack developer. So guess what? From that point on, I was learning C#. I was learning how to work in the database, writing sprocs, we had an MVC like structure, so learning how to build out models and views, how to set up services. It was a full immersion experience into that development process, and I couldn't have been happier. So here I'm progressing along. I'm working as a software developer, just having a great time solving problems with code. And in my National Guard, I'd gone to this camp. I learned a whole lot more about cybersecurity, and then I started working there as a cybersecurity expert. The cool part was I was the first Green Beret to go through that course and earn the 25 Delta Cyber Network Defender. And I was the first one in the North Carolina National Guard to ever go get qualified for that job. It was actually a really hard course. You have to pass 3 out of 5 of those SANS boot camps in a very condensed time. and it has about a 50% failure rate. So half the people that go don't pass. I was super passionate. I fell in love. I was able to not only pass that course, but I graduated at the top of my class. And then I came out and I started working every 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, helping defend the networks at the bases I was working at for the National Guard. So I was getting to put that cybersecurity education into practice while I was really learning to be a developer on my other side of the house. Now, one of the big things that kind of hit and happened in the world was COVID kind of hit, and it really changed the dynamic of everything everyone was doing. And for me, the way it changed it is it pushed me into realizing it was time for a career change. So I started looking around at different job opportunities where I could leverage software development as well as my security background. And that's what led me to Security Journey, where I work currently. I actually met Chris Romeo on an interview, and he was looking for an AppSec engineer that could come in and build training content around teaching developers security practices. And it was like my holy grail. I'm like, this is amazing. I love doing this. I love teaching. I love social interaction. I love learning. And I love AppSec, or I love security, and I love application development. So that's where I jumped into this seat. And I started with Security Journey a little over about 3 years ago. A little over 3 years ago, I've been working here. And our company's grown so much since then. We had an acquisition. Our original company got bought out. So I was actually employee number 4 for Security Journey. There's only 6 of us starting out. We grew up to over a 20-person company. We were acquired, and now we're a large, thriving company. And it's been an amazing experience. Now I get the opportunity to sit down and do podcasts with you, as well as the fact that I get to teach security to developers. It's something I'm super passionate about. So kind of all that bringing in how that is my security journey to ending up where I am. And currently what I do, I am the Director of Application Security here at Security Journey. I lead all the content development and our curriculum development, as well as the fact that I'm a speaker. I speak at a lot of conferences, SANS multiple times, or not SANS, RSA I've been to multiple times, as well as a bunch of hands-on B-sides, been over to the Lone Star Conference before. I'm really passionate, all my listeners probably know, about security and talking about this stuff. So that is my security journey. Now for the rest of this episode, we're going to be going over the highlight reels of this year. I've talked to a lot of amazing guests this year, and I went through and I went and rewatched all my podcasts, and I pulled out clips that I thought had amazing impact and a great message. I want to kind of bring out those highlight reels from all those conversations I had this year, and prep us into kind of going into next year and what 2024 is going to look like. But before I do that, and before I jump in, we're going to take a quick break and do a word from our sponsors.
How do you create security champions? Security Journey is the solution most adopted to provide application security education to help developers become security champions and produce safer applications. Security Journey training content extends beyond developers to reach the entire SDLC, creating a security-first organization. Learn more about our enterprise security training at securityjourney.com.
All right, welcome back to the Security Champions podcast. I am your guest and host today, Micheal Burch. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a highlight reel of 2023. It's some of my favorite conversations with the guests I've met with. And we're going to start out with my first guest, Chris Romeo. He was actually the person that hired me on to my first real application security role. He was the founder of the company that I work for, and kind of my mentor coming into the application security space. And we had a great conversation about the Champions framework that he had built. It's basically a framework to evaluate your maturity as a Champions program. And the clip that I want to share, it really highlights the importance of how we treat our champions, right? Because a lot of the times we're asking our champions to do stuff for us, but really he reframes that into the question of what can we do for our champions? So let's jump into that and see what we had to say. Right.
And you've captured what I think is one of the most unknown and unrecognized concepts within the world of security champions. And I've been talking about this for about 2 years now. And here it is. It's actually pretty simple. The biggest mistake that most people make when it comes to champions is they make it all about the company. It's what can the champions do for us as a company? And so what I do now is I flip it all the way back around and say, what can the Champions program do to enrich the lives of the developers, the jobs of the developers, the future career aspirations of the developers? And when I put them first and practice, kind of putting them in front of any of the other goals, I end up with a Champions program where nobody wants to leave because they're getting value. And then when they feel appreciated, then I ask them to go do something to improve security inside of their particular product. And of course they're going to do it. They've bought into it. But it's because we value them and we provide something to them that they say, oh, this I don't want to be. Don't kick me out of this. I want to be here. Like, I want to do more for security because they see the value. And so that's what folks really got to get their heads wrapped around early in the champion process, is saying, this isn't about the company. Yes, the company is going to get some benefits from this, but if you make it about the company, then it's just another program, and the developers can't wait to get out of it.
You've completely flipped that kind of paradigm where it's like the idea is just another program, right? If I just shove security training in front of you and say, you have to do this, check, block, move on, right? Nobody's going to want to do it well. Nobody's going to be enthusiastic about it. But with this whole thing, you've changed the security champions from an asset and you've made them the customer, right? In our mindset, as us running those programs, our security champions, our customers, how can we make our customers happy so they keep returning and using our product? They keep being security champions.
Yeah, and you'll see a bunch of this sprinkled into the framework as well. Like, for example, at Cisco, one of the things I did is I went to ISC Squared and I said, I want to pay for a CSS LP class. I want to pay for, and I want to just bring a bunch of people. So we did a 6-week instructor-led over WebEx. So it was ISC Squared, like one of their top CSS LP instructors, did a 6-week course. I think we did 3-hour sessions or 4-hour sessions. I don't remember what it was. But as my champions program, we just wrote the check. And so I was able to invite 20 out. Now I brought the top people, the ones that were really getting stuff done and were really just killing it. Those are the people that I invited, and all the other 100 champions were like, because we talked about it, I'm like, I'm not going to hide this. I'm like, we've chosen these people because they've gone above and beyond helping us to move security forward. And so we're bringing them into this class, and we paid for the exam too. So that's a $600. The class was probably worth $2,000 a person, and the exam was $600. So they didn't have to. Yeah, could they have gotten it approved by their manager? Yeah, if they would have really gone. But all we did is we wrote the check and we said, come on in, take part in this, and here's how you take the exam when you're done. Welcome to being a CSSLP, because that's one of the value props we give to you as champions. It's amazing when you flip it around on them. I mean, another thing I did, we built a master's degree in cybersecurity through San Jose State, and it was specifically aimed at our security champions. The champions population had grown. Like when I started, and I said there was that 20 ragtag champions, it was about 500 by the time I left Cisco. So it had exploded. So we had multiple cohorts of Cisco people. San Jose State would send professors to Cisco's campus, and they would teach master's level cybersecurity courses based on a curriculum that I designed. And then they would go through it for 2 years. Cisco paid I got Cisco's management to pay the whole thing. There was no reimbursement. I said, can we just write a check for the first semester? And then after that, everything will be done via tuition reimbursement, so the champion would never have to take $1 out of their pocket to make it happen. Figured out how to do that. We had lots of people that graduated from that program and went on to become security roles in different companies. And so but once again, if that wasn't about me, I didn't do that. Like it wasn't like we did that master's program because it helped the company. It provided a value to the champions, and it caused more people to go, wait, you get to be in a master's program here? Well, when you get to you had to be at the elite levels of champions that were getting invited into the program. But people from the outside are looking in going, holy cow, you're getting special training. You're getting, no money out of pocket for master's degrees. You're getting to be part of this network. And it was just a huge value proposition for the champion themselves. The company got a lot of value out of it, don't get me wrong. But when we thought champion first, that really created an environment that people were knocking down the doors. In the latter days of my time at Cisco, people were knocking down the doors trying to get in. They're like, oh, how do I get in? And then we were able to do cool things like set basic requirements. Oh, so you want to be a champion? Here's what you got to do first. You have to go through a certain level of the education program before you can even be considered to be a champion. You have to get your manager to approve a certain amount of time that you're going to put. So we could get really selective then, because we had matured the program in such a way that everybody wanted in. I wasn't going around twisting arms anymore. It was people knocking down the door saying, hey, let me in. I want to be a champion now, which that was a pretty fun time in the program.
One of the best parts I thought about that conversation was the fact that it places our needs to the side and it refocuses on our customers. For security people, often our customers aren't the end user. Our customers, the development teams. It's the higher ups that basically asking us to do these tasks, right? To fulfill a requirement for the organization. And reframing the fact that when we deal with people like our champions and we're working with them and trying to evangelize security, it's really on us to make sure that they have the value out of it, right? That they are our customers. We want them to join our team. We want them to be evangelized. And if we can't serve them well, then they're not going to work well. They're not going to be good customers, right? So we need to make sure that we treat them like our customers and we support them in all of their needs. Now, this next discussion I had was with Tim Brown. He's over the CISO at SolarWinds at the time. And we had this great discussion about elegant code and what is this concept of elegant code and how this idea of writing code in a way that's no longer just functional, but it's more impactful can lead to better security. So jump right in and let's see what he had to say.
Yeah, great question, great topic. When we look at, so again, back to my background of, I've done a lot of engineering, a lot of code in the background. And by the way, I don't consider my code elegant. My code really got stuff done, right? And it worked well. But when you think about what's elegant, right? Elegant's a hard word to think about. It's not efficient. It's not like structured. It's elegant. Now, so I was thinking of a good analogy. You can read a manual, right? You can read a manual. You read a book, and it's got facts, and it's there. Fact. Then you read like a great novel, and it flows. It is so nice to read. It is, everything's in the right place. Everything just is, working in place and working where it needs to be. Code has that same type of structure, right? Somebody that truly writes elegant code is like a good book. Right? It starts at the beginning, it comes through the right model, it flows exactly the way you want it. It's separated into the right size and right types of modules. It has great architecture, and it just flows as one cohesive piece. Now, elegant code is so simple to maintain. It usually is correct. Bugs in it are not necessarily there. Those elegant code writers really take a lot of pride in what they're producing, but it is truly an art form in many ways, right? It's not just, as I said, I wrote code that wasn't necessarily elegant. It got it done. But there are people out there that when you look at them and it says, oh wow, okay, this is what we're looking for. And why is it so important? Why is it so important from a security perspective? Those who write elegant code usually get mad when a bug shows up in their code, whether it's security or just a bug. They don't say, I didn't have a bug in my code. What they'll say is my test program didn't catch it. Because that's the maturity that they have. They write something, they test it. They write their test harnesses around the outside of it, and they're doing all of their own work. And what you see is that level of a coder usually produces, a good percentage of your software and produces a very low percentage of your issues and bugs. So in many ways, we don't necessarily teach elegance in school. We don't respect elegance. We don't promote elegance as much as what we should. And, from a coding perspective, I think it is important that we do that, right? I think it's important that we highlight, that highlight folks that are doing great, that are, and give them enough of the exposure so that we get more and more and more people doing those things that are over and above. Because at the end of the day, it's so much cheaper to fix either a security issue or a bug early in the process than it is when a product gets released.
My favorite part from that conversation, coming back out of that video, is that it takes writing software from just an engineering task, and it emphasizes that it's an art, right? We're not just there having a task list and execution. We're designing and developing to solve a problem, right? We have a problem statement that we have to solve for, and then getting to a solution to that, it's an art form. There's no one way to approach that problem. And you can just be functional and lay it out and just get it done as fast as you can. Or you can take a moment and draw that Mona Lisa, right? Like make the code beautiful. Let it tell that story. Don't always be in this just rush to gate to functionality. But let's write code in a way that's not only elegant, but it's secure because it's so well created. Now, this next guest I have is Ken Buckler. Met with him, and we talked about a lot of security research he was doing in the space of education, cyber, and software development. And we had a great conversation about the human side of security. So we're going to jump in and let's hear what he had to say about the human side of security.
Important that is often overlooked is the human side of cybersecurity, the human side of software development when it comes to securing the code. There's a lot of reliance on tools that are designed to scan code. There's a lot of reliance on code reviews, but it's not as much reliance on actually learning how to write that code securely in the first place. And I've always kind of wondered, how effective are code reviews if you don't actually invest in that learning? So I set out to do some research and figure out, what strategies are actually working. How are organizations securing their code? What's working? What isn't? And what I really found interesting was that the organizations that invested in training always, or almost always, had improvements in their code security. At the same time, the organizations that were investing in tools and code reviews without investing in that training didn't see nearly as often for code security improvement.
Coming out of that conversation, one of my favorite things that he said and that we really emphasized in that was the fact that a lot of the time we're looking for such a technical solution to our problems. I want a tool. I want something out of the box that solves all my problems. A good example of this might be AI. AI should come in and solve all my problems. Well, as we're learning, as we use these technologies, no matter how great the tool is, you have to put an emphasis on the human side of security. It's something actually we say in special operations a lot. It's your strongest tool is your the human, right? It's you put the right person in the right place. It doesn't matter how you gear him; he's going to get the mission done, right? So way bigger emphasis on the human side, not just the technology and the tooling side that humans going to use. Now, the next person I met, Dustin Lear, and we talked about his championship guide for basically running a champions program. And the conversation that I want to pull out, it was a great conversation, but the one part I really want to pull out and share with you guys was on this idea of gamification of champions programs. And a lot of time there's hesitancy about gamification, what it really means. So let's jump in and hear what Dustin had to say about gamification of champion programs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the term gamification can be misused. I think it's a good idea to kind of step back and define that really quick, because essentially it comes down to what are elements in games that are motivating you, and how can we use those elements in non-game situations? Okay, so it's not, when people think gamification, I've heard a misnomer that it's, hey, you're turning it into a game. You're gamifying it. You're making it a game. That's not actually true. Gamification is more about human motivation, like figuring out what drives us as humans to play games and trying to apply those techniques elsewhere. And one of the reasons people look to games to that is people don't have to play games. Why do you play games? Why do you pick up your phone and start playing this game that you're addicted to? What is making you addicted to it? You know, like what makes you come back for more and keep you motivated and engaged and all that stuff? You're not getting any money for it. You're not winning any points with your family for it. Like, what about it is keeping you coming back, right? So it's almost like the games industry has solved a lot of the human motivation elements. What can we learn from them? And how do we apply those things to real life?
So one of the companies like to call out that do this real, it's because I have an oldest daughter. She plays on her phone a lot. She's 14. She's in the top 2% of Duolingo learners because it has a phenomenal setup to reward you for learning. Like, it's done really well to create kind of an addictive style learning process that makes her come back for more. So she has like almost a 2-year learning streak where she hasn't missed a day for 2 years playing on Duolingo because they do such a good reward system for learning.
Yeah, Duolingo, I've actually studied Duolingo quite a bit because they do use some of the very effective game techniques, like you just mentioned, like a streak. You know, if you consistently come back and you're doing something that's beneficial over and over, you can earn benefits by having that streak, right? There's other techniques too. Like, think about things like boosters. Okay, you're getting points for something. One technique that I actually like to use or recommend with security champions is, how do you encourage people to continuously attend your trainings or your meetings, your brown bags? What about a booster? Something like this. If people consistently attend your meetings, maybe they get double points, right? Like, they show up to 3 in a row. Hey, you're now on, you've earned it. It's a streak essentially, but you've earned a booster from it. Like, you get double points now for anything else that you do, as long as you keep that, right? You see that in games all the time, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Or things like collection sets. You know, let's say you've got a bunch of actions that you want your champions to take. Like, I want you to report a potential issue, or fix a bug here, or attend a meeting, speak up at a meeting, all those different things. What if you've got like this collection set idea where, you know, if you do all of them, you get some other kind of bonus, you know, which we've seen. Like think about back in the day. Do you remember the Monopoly McDonald's game?
Yes, I do.
Okay, this is great because it's a collection set idea. It's, you've got 2 out of 3 properties, and what do we do as humans naturally without any other reward? We're like, oh, well, we need to get the 3rd one. Like, the set's incomplete. I need to fix that. You know? So again, it comes down to taking those techniques that work so well with games and figuring out how to apply them in non-game situations.
Coming out of that video, one of the best things about that is the new look on what gamification actually means. It's not just making a game, right? It's taking those principles of why people play games, even though they don't have to, and applying it to something we want somebody to do, right? And it's, whether that's education or champion programs, however we apply that, it's such an important factor to understand that we're not just making games. It's not reducing the enterprise style of approach. So it's not less professional just because we're gamifying it. Take the principles of gamification and how do we apply those to make sure we stay sticky and we engage those champions and bring them into part of our program. Now, my next guest was Ron Warner, and we had a discussion on security mentorship, which I think is such an important topic. And one of the clip that I want to share with you from this conversation is about being able to ask questions, being flexible, and having mentor emotional intelligence, right? So to be able to teach people to be emotionally intelligent and empathetic to a situation. Part of this comes down to just not being the house of no and coming and say, hey, this is the way it has to be. So let's go in and hear what Ron Warner said about mentorship.
Quick story on that, Mike, where back in the day, again, this was the International Hotel Company, they had a Windows 7 system. So this was like 6-7 years ago. Even so, Windows 7 they were using for a critical application. They couldn't patch it. The application developers said, you know what, if you install Service Pack, we think our application is going to go belly up. Can we get a waiver? So it comes back to asking the right questions. What is it being used for? Who is using it? Where is it being used? So it's like the Kipling, Rudyard Kipling, 6 on a serving man, who, what, why, when, where, how. We asked all of those, and actually it turned out they were actually rewriting it. They just needed to limp along for like another 4 to 6 months before they could virtualize it. So I said, yeah, don't patch. We segregated it on the network. We told the people, don't use email, web browsing on this system. You have a desktop for that. Was there any critical data on this system? No, it was like room utilization rate. No PII, nothing super sensitive about it. So we made the decision, you don't need to patch, but how many controls do you have that'll say thou shalt have to patch? So it's just having that back and forth, being willing to negotiate type of a conversation, whether it's with the business, with developers, and with security. It's just having crucial conversations, being open as to what is going to be the best way, most efficient way to solve the problem.
And it's that flexibility, right? I think we all get some sort of formal education, whether you even go to college or not, right? You learn security from somewhere, whether it's from a book, online, college, mentor, something. It's willing to apply some of that, the practical knowledge you have, your street knowledge when you're doing this, right? Like, okay, I know the book says this, but using, like you said, using those questions, using that flexibility, going to the core things like, okay, well, why? Now, I'm betting if they said, oh, we plan on using this for another 5 years, your answer might have been a little different, right? Like, that's when things start changing. But you're able to be flexible enough to, instead of like, oh, no, we can't do this, we have to patch, and we shut down the whole conversation, would have been a way worse experience, I'm assuming, for everybody involved, versus having that flexibility and ability to have conversation. And this I'm going to tie us back into the mentor conversation a little bit here too. That is a powerful thing, I think, that not only for our mentors, but our mentors to relay onto the next generation that's coming up, right? If you're in a position, you are mentoring, it's not about just teaching the right answer, but it's teaching about when to be flexible, when to recognize that it's okay to leave the bulleted list that says I have to do it exactly this way, and be flexible enough to hear the other side of the story and be a little more creative with our approaches.
So if you've read the Checklist Manifesto, and we talked earlier about Adam Shostak and threat modeling, that's where I actually first heard about it. Checklists are very helpful just to make sure we're not missing anything, but you're exactly right. That flexibility, when to follow the checklist, and maybe when we need to pivot a little bit, be creative with our problem solving. That's having that openness. Again, as you're mentoring, letting people know, hey, we do provide guidelines for you to follow. Do expect you to follow them, and then if you can't, be able to describe why you can't, and be able to quantify that. Not just because it's hard, but because what is going to be the best for that different situation. And it really will vary, and it comes back to emotional intelligence. And that's really where I try to build that next generation, is being able to develop emotional intelligence. So often we get really focused on what we're doing, particularly if there's an incident. When we think the worst is happening, oh my gosh, a hacker is inside, panic. One of my favorite opening lines from a book, don't panic. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? That's my number one rule for incident response. Take a breath. Our brain likes oxygen for some reason. Think about and then look at it from different perspectives, and then ask, what questions can I ask? Not what do I need to tell someone else to do? They may, asking, particularly as you're coaching someone else, hey, how would you address this? What do you think? Is very powerful, because then they are solving the problem for themselves. See, if we just say, Mike, this is the only way to do a podcast, you can be like, yeah, whatever. If I say, hey, what are your ideas? That's actually a great social engineering technique as well, just getting people to talk and to think, and then we just partner. And together we solve the problems.
Coming out of that conversation, it's so powerful to be able to communicate. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from that clip. It's the fact that our ability to communicate and our ability to come in with an open mind and be flexible and have a creative approach to a problem is so important. Put down the checklist for a minute. The checklist is there because you need to validate you're doing something. But the reality is, take a moment to understand why the checklist is there and be willing to flex from it when it makes sense and meets those business needs. Now, my next guest was Jason Haddix. He's known as the Hacker CISO. And we had a huge conversation about champions programs and places he'd been and worked and seen, how tooling integrates with all that, and really how even the offensive side kind of plays into some of those factors, right? But the clip that I really want to pull out and talk about was really emphasizing how do we bake security into the culture of the organization. So let's hear what Jason Haddix had to say about baking security and culture.
From my experience, right, I've done a lot of consulting in my career. The majority of it was consulting, and so a lot of times you're in there as either a tester or like something like a vCISO, or you are the actual CISO and you get experience that way. But some of the best AppSec programs and the best security engineering programs, which is kind of a newer term, right? Like having a distinct security engineering team, at your organization, have come, by their success partially by having a security champions program. Because what it does is it's not even, sometimes I like to call it an intangible, but it's not even an intangible. It's a very tangible, but it embeds security ideals and just like the care and culture of security into development teams. And so some of the best examples I've seen are, companies like Riot is one of the ones I like to point out. So Riot Games makes League of Legends and Valorant. And so I come from the gaming industry, but I admired them before they even, before I was even in the gaming industry. But their security champions program is gamified internally to build in every product and development team a security champion, and they've written about it in blogs and presentations, all over the world. And these people inside of the organization, they get, advanced training, which helps them in their career, right? They get some secure code training, they get, secure library usage training, they actually get training budget applied to their job role that they wouldn't normally have, so they get to go to some conferences and stuff like that. And then they're responsible for, helping development teams, either through the, the stand-up or scrum process, to identifying different threat models as piecemeal, or threat modeling, as a whole meeting their applications. And so there's one per big development group, sometimes two, depending on how big the development group is. And the way they gamify it is pretty dope. They have custom swag that you can only get if you're a security champion. It's I think they did League of Legends characters that were like support characters. So if you play that game, you understand that a support character is a character that out of a 5-person team, is going to do the healing and the support skills and the crowd control and stuff like that. And so they did that. They made custom graphics. They had different prizes. They had shirts, hoodies, challenge coins, stickers, all kinds of little tchotchkes. And they really made this group feel, special and empowered. And they didn't just put it on them as an extra responsibility, right? What their idea was trying to bake security into the culture of every development team. And their main method was threat modeling and just having these people there, a small army. They did meetups. They introduced them to the wider security scene, like OWASP and localities. They would host those things. And so I have seen this model work, a couple times, really well. But you can't you can't half do it, right? It's not security champions program. If you half put effort into it and you leave your inductees, the people who either self-identify as interested in security or who you think would be good at it, if you leave them alone, the program will atrophy, and you won't get the desired effect. So it requires management. And so both at Riot and in my history, there was a part of the security group that was completely dedicated to managing that program. And it can be usually one or two people to manage the security champions and to manage what their responsibilities are, to make sure that the program is properly gamified and they're getting something out of it rather than it just being an extra responsibility, to also to keep in contact with our AppSec people and understand what the secure defaults are and the guardrails that we want implemented, right? And how do we train them, and what is the best training for them to take next based on what we know about the different development teams. And so that's a little bit of my experience from kind of being next to Riot, having implemented some of that at Ubisoft, having consulted some places, and but the programs in general, super high speed, super powerful if you can get them going and working.
Great conversation with Jason Haddix. Love the concepts of how we can truly change security culture within our organizations. Now, our next conversation I had was with Tanya Jenka, also known as She Hacks Purple, and we talked about the security champion recipe. Basically, here's the recipe she came up with on how to do champions right. And the clip that I want to pull out from this, and I think is so important when we think about running champion programs, is how do we keep our champions? There's one thing of just setting up a program and getting people to join, but it's keeping that program alive is sometimes one of the hardest things that we have to accomplish as people in charge of these programs. So let's hear what Jenka had to say about keeping your champions.
And then there's rewarding. So I worked in the federal government for Canada for 13 and a half years of service. And then I moved on to private industry. But in the government, you are not allowed spending money on stuff. So I would do things like bake cookies or muffins. My team would bring in donuts sometimes that we would pay for out of pocket. We would create certificates and we would print them on our photocopier. But things you can do that are a gift are stuff like a book. So I cheat a lot. So I'll come up with 5 different security books that I wish they would read. And I'm like, I want to give you a reward. I'm going to buy you one of these 5 books. You pick. Ha ha ha, joke's on you. You're learning more security. I'll buy them like a YubiKey. I'll get them approval to go to a conference and get them training. If my team can afford to send them on training, I do. I invite them to, so I used to live in Ottawa, so I now live in British Columbia. And we had an OWASP chapter, and I was one of the chapter leaders. And in my extremely biased opinion, I thought it was one of the best chapters around the world. And it was this wonderful, amazing community, and it's still there. So if you live in Ottawa, you should go. And we have one in Victoria now near where I live, and it's also wonderful. But what we would do is we would all go and have dinner together and then go to the OWASP meetup together. And so they'd pay for their own dinner, but they would get to have my undivided attention about everything. And then we would go have fun at this thing. I would get them subscriptions, so Safari Books Online, O'Reilly, like anything where I could like talk their manager into helping me pay for things as a reward and a gift for them to say thank you. I also, this might sound weird, but giving them your time and undivided attention has value. I remember I used to be a dev manager, so I was a dev a long time, around 17 years. And so when I switched over, it was quite a shock because dev behavior and social cues are very different than security. But I remember one of my people came over and I was like, one second, okay, done. And then I turned away from my computer and looked directly at her. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're so good. When I go visit my team leader, he's typing, he's like, yeah, what do you want? He doesn't even look at me. He's like, she's like, do you realize your body language is like, I am your entire focus right now. I'm like, yeah, this is my job. She's like, usually people are like texting during meetings. They're just not paying attention. You make me feel like I matter to you. I'm like, you do. And so making them feel like they matter, like taking their advice, taking their feedback, listening and changing based on their good feedback So any of those things that you can do helps them know how much they matter to you, and that's what you're trying to get across. You're trying to get across gratitude.
One of the things I love about that conversation is how just giving someone your attention is so powerful. Treating someone with respect, taking the moment to pull out of work, make eye contact, and do those basic social tasks that show someone that you respect them, that you care what they have to say, and you're giving them your time can have such a big impact. Even if you have nothing else to give them, that's something, and it means a lot to people. So don't be afraid to think out of the box and use those type of techniques to reward your champions. Now, my last conversation, bringing in kind of the end here, I met with Derek Fisher. He's actually the author of the Application Security Program Handbook. And one of the conversations that I wanted to pull out of our larger conversation was about bridging the gap between security and development. There's been a huge theme about this. RSA did a theme basically kind of on this recently. And the whole concept is we have a development team, we have a security team. How do we get those two departments to start working better together? So let's hear what Derek Fisher had to say about bridging the gap.
I think the conflict comes from the fact that, I shouldn't say the fact because this isn't true everywhere, but I believe that the conflict comes from engaging security too late. And if you bring in a security architect or a security engineer, or let's just take the example of using a scanning tool to scan your software. If you're not doing that until later in your development cycle, then yeah, it's going to cause conflict because now you're up against a hard deadline. You got the product owners, beating down the door, asking you, to meet a deliverable, and suddenly security comes in and says, well, you have critical findings that we can't go out the door. Now, again, that I'm simplifying it. I think there's shades of that throughout most organizations where you're not waiting until the last moment, but you're also not incorporating security as early as possible in your life cycle, and that's where I think the conflicts come up. So, what I've always kind of viewed application security as is it's a relationship. It's a relationship. Building business. When I look at the other peer teams that are in the security, in a large security organization or a small security organization, it's not that they're not focused on the relationships, but their position is either to, if you look at a SOC team or a network security team or any kind of security team that is directed to protect the organization, and when I mean protect the outer shell, right? The network, the endpoints, that kind of stuff. They're focused more on IT security. Get the tools out, get them implemented, get our monitoring in place, get our response plans, tightened up, and that can be done kind of independent of the end user, right? We're just going to deploy this, endpoint protection to your machine, and that's it. You don't have a say in it. With things like information security or GRC, they're more focused on those client engagements and dealing with the clients, and they have to have those relationships with the clients, but they may interpret that back and just say, here's what the client wants, go do it, and you have 2 months to do it, no negotiation. I think in the application security space, you have to have a different mindset and mentality, because if you're not partnering with that engineering team, you're not going to get things done. And you almost, the way I always kind of frame it is that application security is the sidecar to development. And we should be riding along with the engineers as they're building that software to ensure that we're not there to say no. We're there to say here's the the appropriate way to do it. And what I've really found is that my team and the application security individuals that I've worked with, we're not always the ones coming up with the best solution. What I've often found is that having that conversation, having that relationship with the engineering team means that you're working together to come up with that solution. Because to be honest, the security teams have to be able to not just know security, but know the full technical stack that the engineers are developing their software on. That's not possible. You may be able to know enough to be dangerous, but especially if you work in an organization that has .NET stacks, has Java stacks, has Node stacks, you're not going to know all of those languages and all the nuances and the exact way to solve the problem in 4 different languages. I mean, that's just it's not saying it's impossible, but it's not a common finding in the application security space. So I think having that that relationship with the engineering team and being able to say like, hey, look, here's what we need to get to, right? We need to have just as an example, we need to implement we have to implement least privilege, right? Here's some thoughts around how we can do that. And bounce those ideas off the engineering team. They're going to come back and say, well, here's my thoughts, here's our thoughts, and then with that relationship, you're able to come to a design that's going to satisfy both security and get, things done at the right time. So I think that's the biggest thing that I think anybody can take away from an application security position is those relationships. They have to exist. They have to be good, and they can't be adversarial.
And it's such a great clip to end on, right? It's talking about this cohesion. It's talking about how we can support each other from both sides. This isn't one job for one department. It really focuses on the fact that security needs to help development and development needs to help security. And the more we can start recognizing each other as a one cohesive team, the better it's going to be for all of us. Now that kind of ends all of our highlight reels from throughout the year. I want to give a final thank you to not only all of my guests that were able to contribute to these conversations this year and really bring out some powerful advice that we can take and go forward and do security better with, but giving me their time and just having fun with me when talking about these things. I also want to thank all of my guests here that you've come and taken your time to listen to what I've had to say, listen to my guests, and hopefully grown with us in this kind of security adventure. Looking forward into 2024, we're going to be kicking it back off, Security Champions Podcast. This year, I've focused so much on a lot of higher level stuff about how we run these programs and really focusing on the approach of Security Champions. Going in next year, be ready for a little bit of a shift. I think we're going to add a little bit more value to even more of a broader audience as we dive into more security topics that are relevant for everybody, not only running champion programs, but really anyone who's a champion for security within your organization. That's the value we want to add. And what we're going to be looking in 2024 is how do we have the conversations and bring you the right information to make sure that you are prepared and that you can be that champion for your organization. So thank you again. I appreciate you taking your time with me this year. And as I always say at the very end, remember, security is a journey, not a destination.